This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, we have all heard that where there is smoke, there's fire. Beware that where marshes are smoldering and mixed with fog, there is the likelihood for deadly roadway disasters. Are recent incidents just a passing weather phenomenon, or can we expect more? Crime is always smoldering somewhere. We will examine whether there are now second thoughts about the so-called progressive movement, which has promoted criminal justice reform, and we will look at what to expect from the new NOPD Superintendent. Names have surfaced of those selected for the governor-elect's unprecedented advisory committee on the city of New Orleans. Still uncertain is how much of an impact it will have. And we will take a special look at a Times-Picayune feature that examined in detail the condition of the local Catholic Church, which is facing serious money issues, closing churches and combining some parishes. And finally, in a state which has long boasted of being the sportsman's paradise, we will discuss why limits are being set on a fishing favorite, speckled trout. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Stephanie Riegel, staff writer of the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, LeBron Joseph, anchor and reporter, WGNO-TV Channel 26, and Mike Perlstein, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4. Go over to LeBron first and super fog. Boy, we've been hearing about that and having to endure it, too.
Yes.
So tell us about it, what's its causes, and are we going to keep on having it?
Well, it's interesting because it's, as Mike put off camera before, it's the second big term we've had to learn on top of saltwater wedge.
Right.
You know, and I'm sure the costumes this Mardi Gras will parody this thing. Nonetheless, what we've come to understand as super fog is a mixture of the fog that we would normally see this time of the year in the early mornings with smoke from some of the wildfires. We're probably not the only place that's seeing this. There's those fires out on the feed as well. However, super fog is being blamed for a couple of pretty tragic incidents, and most notably the 7 lives lost out on I-55. Right. And then this past Tuesday, someone lost their life on I-10. The meteorologists and the different experts, if you will, that have spoken about this super fog, if you will, the main difference being that it's certainly a very thicker brand, if you will, of fog. And whereas you may be in foggy conditions like you normally would be driving, suddenly your visibility goes to zero. Right. Very, very dangerous conditions. And I would imagine very disorienting. So bad that you probably can't see the lines on the road, you know. If you just stop, you're in danger of being hit from behind, you know, you're trying to pull over or whatever the story is. So it's a really, really, really dangerous condition. But when we talk about mixing fog with smoke or the mix of this happening, most notably to blame is the wildfires. And there are several across the state. The western part of the state is really getting hammered with wildfires. Not so bad here, but there has been a really menacing one in New Orleans East that's been burning for a couple of months now. You
know, that's nothing new, really, to have marsh fires. We've lived with them, but this intensity, of course, an outgrowth, too, of the drought. We've really never had such a terrible drought, too. So there's the issue of trying to handle this and, you know, try to do something to mitigate the fog, but the fog, but also to keep traffic safe. So what's being done on both of those arenas?
Well, I think it's kind of, the question started being asked that one organization that does traffic controls probably better or at least as well as anyone in the region is the Causeway Commission. Those folks, when in fact there is fog, when in fact they've got party drivers across the causeway, they're pretty proactive about doing what they need to do. Carlson Dufreshow and his team out there. I don't think we've had situations where we're shutting down I-55, we're shutting down the twin spans, we're shutting down I-10 East. I don't recall that being done before these incidents happened. And I think that what it's causing the entire region of law enforcement to do is to try to step up to be a little bit more proactive, because there are voices saying, hey, hang on a second, y'all knew that no one could see on the road. Why are we allowing people to drive into this? And therefore, Tuesday was the accident, was the, on the heels of the thing a couple of weeks ago. Wednesday, everything was shut down. They shut down half of the twin spans. They shut down Chef Highway, Highway 11, a lot more.
So we have seen some traffic controls, but what about putting out those fires?
The fire is a tough one. And I think that the approach early on was to, well, let's pray for rain. Because it is a fire that is burning pretty deep. It flares up from time to time. It's a very large area, about 250 acres, surrounded by pipelines. There's a gas pipeline there.
That's scary, isn't it?
The NOFD early on made the determination that it's tough for us to get to this on private property, and knowing that we're driving over marsh, we can't get big equipment out here or anything. And even if, in fact, we are spraying water on this, we feel as if the water's just going to run off. The property owner, as well as many other agencies, have sort of come in and are using pumps to pump water on this in hopes that they can help mitigate it. But the big thing we need is rain.
Yeah. You mentioned a while ago that sometimes the fog is so thick that you can't see the lane markings. Some places on normal days you can't see the lane markings.
Exactly. So for now to have this super fog, if you will, really complicates
And you think there's added motivation to put out the fires because it's affecting air quality, and people all over the city are complaining about respiratory issues.
The folks
and
that
just
live
the
out there,
smell
you're right.
of smoke.
You're right, Mike. The folks that live out there have dealt with it for a couple of months. I was out there yesterday for about an hour, and I had to put my clothes in the bag when I got home.
So right now, the Corps is helping with pumping water there, and of course, nature is helping a little bit of rain.
Yeah, state forestry, a number of agencies, the Corps. NOFD was out there yesterday monitoring the pumps and pumping water, and they dug a fire ditch along the side of where that pipeline is.
So if you run into a fog bank, don't speed, slow down.
Slow down and pull over.
Yeah.
Get off the road.
Yeah.
Put your low beam lights on for the
Yeah, right, exactly. No flashers. All right. Thanks a lot, LeBron.
Sure.
Mike, over to you. You did a long interview with Orleans Parish DA Jason Williams, who's kind of had to pivot a little bit from what he campaigned on.
Yeah, pivot I think is the right word. People are calling it that. I have the benefit of having known Jason Williams. Even before he was a city councilman, he was a prominent criminal defense attorney. Then he had his term on city council. And he ran for the district attorney, and as you recall, it was against Kiva Landrum, who had been an interim DA herself before becoming a judge. So very distinct candidates, and Jason clearly carved out the path as the criminal justice reformer. And going back to some of the things that he advocated for when he was on the council, which was bail reform, in fact, eliminating bail in a lot of instances, money bail. He was active with the Innocence Project New Orleans, and he ran and was elected on that platform. And it included some very hard campaign promises of never to prosecute juveniles as adults, something that was done fairly regularly by his predecessor, Leon Canizero. He said he wasn't going to use the multiple bill, which can enhance sentences for people convicted multiple times of felonies. And as he entered into, it really happened right away, took office, and it happened at a time of a big spike in violent crime, including violent juvenile crime, all those carjackings. And right away, it was about 5 months into his tenure, almost 3 years ago, when a couple of, they're 15 and 16-year-old juveniles killed a woman in an attempted carjacking as she was delivering groceries to in-laws during the COVID pandemic shutdown. Yeah. And he did a kind of a hard bit of introspection, and he immediately went back on his promise and charged those juveniles as adults. And he's now done that multiple times, including the Fricky case with 4 young teenagers, 3 of them, female. And I was really, in following this evolution, just kind of wondering what was going on in the mind of Jason Williams. We had seen him suddenly, quietly, but start using the multiple bill, which is not always necessarily used as 3 strikes you're out, I want to send someone to prison for life, but often as leverage to get someone to plead guilty in a plea deal. So he started, thinking and acting more like a prosecutor, and I just having, known him previously and seen the evolution during his almost 3 years as the DA, I bugged him a little for a couple weeks to, sit down and really open up. And he was quite candid. He said, yeah, I was wrong on some of those things that he promised. And in getting to the root of some of his change in thinking, he did explain how when you sit in that chair, you get a parade of victims and victims' families in the case of murder, and you hear the profound impacts on these people's lives, and that stuck with him. And we know the Fricky case, that's been big in the news, but imagine a parade of people like that and in those situations regularly coming to your office, and he admits that has changed him.
And he's been a crime victim too.
And then, in the midst of all that, he and his 70-year-old mother get carjacked. So those cases had to recuse himself from that. But no, it was thoughtful. And what is interesting in the big picture, that he came as a reform candidate for DA around the same time as that was happening in several other cities, Philadelphia and San Francisco. Very progressive-minded DAs who one after the other have been recalled, have been removed from office, been restricted by state legislatures. So whereas the pendulum swung maybe far left on some progressive policies, the reality of crime has pushed the pendulum maybe back toward the middle. And Jason Williams, I think, has sort of skillfully carved out a middle path. He still has a civil rights division to look at claims of wrongful conviction, and they've done a lot with the non-unanimous jury verdicts coming back into court. So he's really carved out, I think, a middle path, but very much was candid in admitting that the psychology of sitting in that chair of the DA does change a person.
Made him rethink things. A really great interview, and you can find it on the website, your website,
That's right. WWLTV.com.
All right, thanks a lot, Mike. Stephanie, over to you. The Archdiocese of New Orleans really continues to have some financial problems, and a recent announcement of some churches closing and combining parishes.
Right. They announced a couple of weeks ago that they were closing or consolidating 13 parishes. That's more than 10% of the 111 parishes across the Archdiocese of New Orleans. 11 of those parishes will be merged or consolidated into 5 new parishes, some of them with new names. And then 2 other ones will be sort of just assumed into other existing parishes or broken up and taken over by other existing parishes. So, it was a surprise, I think, to a lot of people out there. It was not a surprise to the people in the affected parishes. They had known for at least a year, and probably more than that, then they were sort of, under scrutiny by the Archdiocese. It's part of a larger process that the Archdiocese began a couple of years ago, really looking at what they call the sustainability and the vitality of their parishes and evaluating them. They shared their process with me in an interview, and last year, in October of 22 or so, they began looking at the numbers that are submitted every year by the parish, mostly self-reported data. It's not just financial data, it's participation numbers. It's do they have a school associated with them? It involves things like, do they have deferred maintenance? Do they have a giant old building that needs $1 million worth of air conditioning repairs? And began looking at all of that. And the parishes that really appeared to be in trouble, they got with, and they hired a consulting firm that kind of goes around the country doing this, called the Catholic Leadership Institute, and started working with them on a plan. And each parish came up with a council or a committee that worked with the CLI facilitators that came down to work on this and to try to come up with a plan, or at least to sort of come up with a more comprehensive look at what was going on and what, if anything, could be done. They submitted these plans in late August, and less than 8 weeks later, the news came out of who was closing. And we talked to parishioners at some of those parishes, and some of them really felt let down or like they had been misled, which was a complaint that I heard in other dioceses that worked with Catholic Leadership Institute facilitators. They felt like these are consultants that make money going around closing parishes. The Archdiocese said that's not really a fair characterization, but they admitted that in some cases, some of these parishes are just dying on the vine. And part of it is because of demographic changes in the city. Part of it is a city that's, look, we're losing population. A lot of our parishes are graying on the heels of COVID, where there aren't as many people that feel the need to go to church, right? Or to, and then that affects the amount of money that they contribute every month. And on top of all that, of course, you have the archdiocesan bankruptcy case. And it's important to remember, you know, that our archdiocese is not insolvent by any means. It has a lot of money. You know, they've got at least $500 million in assets that they report on their balance sheet, and that's not including a whole lot of other stuff that we can't even see.
And of course, they are selling properties too.
And then they also insure like $2 billion worth of property, and even that's probably a low number. And those are properties that are, you know, technically owned by the parishes, but they're really all under the control of the archdiocese.
Stephanie, I had a quick question. In the wake of Katrina, biggest pushback in terms of closing parishes was St. Augustine Church in Tremay. There were the protests and all that. That church did remain open. It remains open to this day. But I haven't seen any big pushback from any of the parishes.
I don't think there's even there's not a huge groundswell of opposition, because I don't think any of them are that viable. I mean, there were some legitimate complaints that I think Channel 4 reported on one of the parishes who felt like the parishes were disproportionately low income and had black parishioners. And I mean, I think that's true on paper. And it's because they're older, poorer parishes. I'm not justifying it, but I'm just saying that, and irrespective of the bankruptcy case, how long can they keep these parishes open if nobody's going to Mass? And really, it's not like they're saying they're pulling out of that area. They're going to consolidate 3 churches that don't have many people.
We need to anticipate any more?
They do anticipate more. They say this is just the beginning. They're going to keep looking at parishes that are struggling, and that there will be more consolidations, at least, in the future.
All right. Thanks a lot, Steph. E, over to you. The Transition Committee on New Orleans, the names of that committee were announced today, or this week, rather.
First of all, a quote. During his campaign, Jeff Landry was interviewed by Tucker Carlson, and he was asked about New Orleans, and Jeff Landry said, "I want to bend New Orleans to my will." And so I think he might be going that direction. Let me mention something about this advisory committee. This is a tool that governments have, like blue ribbon committees. And what they are, they're really advisory committees. They're supposed to be populated with people who are experts in an area. And so they don't have any legislative power. And so it's not like the same thinking that you do for something governmental, like one man, one vote, and we've got to have 2 of these people and 2 of that people and all that. It's supposed to be like a committee of experts giving advice. And then what to do with the advice is up to the people who are elected. And so that's what this is to do. I could tell you in my own experience in the 90s with the Dorothy May Taylor ordinance, that about integrating the Mardi Gras cruise, I was on the Blue Ribbon Committee. And in the end, the final product, which became the law, which everybody agreed to, including the council, including Dorothy May Taylor, came out of the Blue Ribbon Committee. And so sometimes if you get a bunch of people together and you put them in a room and let them talk, you can get an idea. But in this case, I have to say there's 27 people that have been appointed. Boise Bollinger, the shipyard guy, is chairing it. I'm sure they're all wonderful people, okay? But glancing down at it, I think there's some people that are very impressive, especially impressive, and they're not meaning to shortcome the other people. But Leon Canazero, the former DA, John Casmon, who's been very active all his life and career in police and justice, Ron Foreman with the Audubon Institute, Michael Heck with Greater New Orleans, the CEO of Greater New Orleans Inc., Walter Leger of New Orleans and Company, and Paul Rainwater, who's been a lobbyist for the city of New Orleans. And there's more names. I mean, there are some good people on this. Also very interested is at one appointment is Joe Lapinto, who's the sheriff of Jefferson Parish. And some people will say, why are you going to have a Jefferson Parish sheriff on this committee? Well, that's the way you got to think about this. You got to get people who are professionals in different perspectives. You're not trying to have that same kind of balance.
Now, the eyebrows being raised about Lapino is that there's no representative from New Orleans law enforcement.
Right.
Now, this is supposed to be a New Orleans advisory committee, and the crime problem is largely rooted in New Orleans, so where is that present?
Well, you know, I was thinking about that. I don't know what's in your minds, but there's nobody from the council on there. Nobody from the mayor's office. And I would think that the problem with people from New Orleans is that they spend the whole time defending themselves. That you need people out there to bring in another perspective. And the police chief here is brand new to the job. And so, again, it's not the same way you think about things. It's like trying to get professional advice.
I can list a bunch of, former NOPD chiefs who are still in town who would jump at a chance to,
Oh yeah, believe me.
advise.
I mean, somebody like Ron Parishes, people like that. I mean, they'd be excellent, and I can't defend that. I don't know. And I know they made these decisions in a hurry too. I mean, within a matter of weeks, they appointed all this committee and had their first meeting last Wednesday.
Well, we have to look at the political leanings of the people named to that committee.
Well, yeah, but I mean, Joe LaPinta wouldn't be considered to be. I mean.
Well, LeBron, this could go on all night long, couldn't it? I see LeBron smiling, and we do have to wrap it up. So, yeah, I guess the committee basically will come out with a report, and we'll see what the committee has to say, and if there's
some
any action on
legislator
that
council
report.
might say it's a great
Right.
idea. They may just throw it in the trash can, but
Yeah,
it's advisory.
So some like the committee, and there's also some criticism of it too.
Questions.
So
There you go.
we'll see where it all goes. Okay, let's see where we go next. Right now is Mike. Back over to you, and kind of have to make it kind of tight now too. But we have a new superintendent at NOPD. What's our plan?
Well, she's laid that out, and she really wants to put priority on getting the NOPD and the city out of the consent decree, to do crime fighting in a way that uses force multipliers, because she just faces reality. There's a depleted police force,
Yeah.
fewer than 1,000 cops, and she is doing a full embrace of technology that can kind of help do more with less. And it looks like she's had a very, kind of gentle introduction to New Orleans. She was an, interim when Michelle Woodfork's interim, position ended. She came in even before confirmation and was getting to know the department, making those connections, and then she had a council confirmation hearing, the first ever for that, and answered questions at length. Had a pretty polished presentation, and even then it took several weeks before she was, sort of formally removed the interim from her title with the Gallier Hall, swearing in. And one thing that was most interesting, showing how she's really working quietly and behind the scenes, and made a big splash with it, I think is a good thing when you're new. Hasn't moved any of the deputy chiefs. She embraced Michelle Woodfork to join the command staff. But one thing popped up, and it was when the federal judge in the consent decree really slammed the NOPD in that PIB investigation of Jeffrey Vappy,
Right.
the mayor's bodyguard, how PIB violated many elements of the consent decree and how they conducted that. But the federal judge stopped short of sanctions and wrote in her order that she was going to wait on that because she was given a good sort of preliminary, action plan by Ann Kirkpatrick. So somewhere in all of that, where Kirkpatrick was still in the process of, she was an interim and she was in the process of, getting that confirmation. She was working behind the scenes and crafting a plan, got the ear of the federal judge enough for the judge to hold off on sanctions. So I say that's a big positive for the
So
city.
this is really just the beginning. So more time to see how this is all going to work out for Ann
now,
Kirkpatrick.
Yeah, she comes at a time of a crime trend edging down naturally. She inherited that. She wants to build on that momentum.
Okay, doke. Thanks a lot, Mike. Okay, wrap up with you, LeBron. Speckled trout. What's the deal
Oh
here?
my God, our prize speckled trout. We've had the most generous limits of any southern state. If we went out today, we could take home 25 speckled trout per man. That would be 125 fish that we could catch today at the limit of size 12-inch, minimum of 12-inch, and that is changing. The fishery is stressed and in trouble. Our neighbors to our left and right, both Texas and Florida, I think the max there is like a 15. I think Texas might be 5, western Louisiana, parts of western Louisiana, 5 near Calcasieu and all. And so that speckled trout limit is moving. It's the first time in a couple generations, certainly, moving down to 15 now, starting on November 20th. And the minimum size for speckled trout will now be 13 inches. And it's the Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries been debating this back and forth with the legislature and Fish Captains Association, and it's needed change. I'm a fisherman. I fish every weekend, and yeah, the numbers have been down for a couple of years now.
So that's 15 per person per day?
That's still a lot of fish. That's 30
that's still-
fillets. I don't think we'd eat
still
30
eat pretty
fillets
good.
amongst us. Yeah.
Eat pretty good, but I mean, to hear that speckled trout is sort of endangered right
Yes.
now, overfished, for an area that has just always had speckled trout.
Yes.
It's just always been
It
on
is
the
our
menu, so
prized
that's
fish.
concerning. Yeah.
But also redfish is being considered because there were issues once before
Right.
with redfish, and flounder is under a moratorium until November 30th. So no Thanksgiving flounder if you do stuff flounder this year.
Okay, so no rules and abide by them, otherwise you could
No
get
rules.
fined.
You will get fined or your boat confiscated or something.
Oh, you lose your fish.
Oh, you
too.
lose
could
your
lose your fish. All right. E, over to you, other stories.
The Downtown Development District commissioned a study on the amount of people that were brought into downtown for the Crew of Boo Parade. And the number was large. It was something like 129,000, but they also tried to find out where they came from. In one large place, there was a two-lane game earlier that afternoon. And it turned out a lot of people at the two-lane game went to see the Crew of Boo after.
Holy cow. That's
Also
awesome.
people who were in the casino and from around there. Not counting the number of people who were in the French Quarter. And so that probably adds to the total, too. So it seems like the Crew of Boo is a popular success so far.
Here to
Oh, that's
stay.
great. Here to stay. Okay, over to you, Steph.
Down from the quarter, we're looking at a controversial hotel proposal for Elysian Fields in the 600 block. It would be 150 rooms, 5 stories tall, which is a lot for that neighborhood. It would require a lot of variances. And it comes at a time when there have been a lot of recent hotel developments in a neighborhood that's struggling to stay on to its residential and single-family units. So that's going to be a neighborhood battle to watch in the months to come.
Okay, great. Thanks. LeBron.
Veterans Day. It is Veterans Day.
Yes, it is.
Visit your local Veterans Hole, be it the World War II Museum or the
Right.
Regional Military Museum down in Houma. That's a really sweet little museum they've got down there saluting the heroes of that area.
Big thanks to all of our veterans. Mike.
Yes.
Well, quick update on the sports scene around New Orleans and Louisiana. We should be in that sweet spot, overlapping football and basketball. But all the teams have question marks or mediocrity. The Saints struggling to gain traction.
A lot of injuries. too.
Pelicans hit by injuries, dipped below 500, and even the #1 ranked LSU Lady Tigers basketball team lost their opener. So let's just hope that some of the teams, kind of gain their
Shining stars, the
footing.
green wave.
And just keep
football.
the faith all around.
Keep
All
the
right,
faith,
guys.
that's right.
Thank you all for being here. Great discussion. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.